Good evening. Tara Sundin. I'm the Community and Economic Development Manager for the city. I recognize a few faces and some names tonight. Samuel Lutz is our Housing and Human Services Manager and is joining me. We thought it would be timely to give you all a presentation on our approach to homelessness as we approach the winter months. And so tonight we're going to focus a little bit more on that side, but happy to come back and dig into the housing side a little bit more. You will hear us talk about housing because the two, of course, are connected, and housing is certainly one of the strategies that we utilize to address homelessness. Samia, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Samia Lutz. Nice to see you, and thanks for having us here. As Tara mentioned, I'm the Housing and Services Program Manager at the city. The city gets funding from the federal government, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, through two of their programs, the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Investment Partnership Program. And this funding, along with the property tax funded housing levy and the new affordable housing sales tax, are the predominant sources that go into funding the programs that we're going to talk about this evening. And I also want to put a little plug in all of the strategies that we embark on are consistent with our 5-year consolidated plan that we do. And that consolidated plan is going to be taking us through mid-year of 2022, but we're already starting the process of developing the new 5-year plan to put forward those priorities. This is a continuum that we focus on programs all across this continuum. And those that are most service intensive are shown on the left and least service intensive on the right. And we fund partner agencies to support programs targeting things in all areas of this continuum. The ones we see and hear about the most tend to be on the left, yet significant funding and time go into the programs on the right, which also serve many, many people. Of course, incomes tend to go higher as you move toward the right of this continuum. And another reason this graphic is useful is that depicts the high visibility of those seeking shelter services on the left, even though many, many people are served through the other programs that the city focuses on this continuum. The ways in which we focus our attention and invest our resources does shift over time. For example, the county might have funding that goes into helping with rent assistance, and the city backs up from things like that and focuses in other areas. But still, consistently over time, we do focus in all of these areas. Next slide, please. So this shows that same continuum, and I'm going to use it to give you examples of programs at each stage. At the top, you can see that the city invests across the full continuum of programs, and the county invests in nearly all of that as well. So the blue box includes shelter operations. I think you're all familiar with Base Camp and the Lighthouse Mission, which the city does not fund typically, at least in its operations. But it also includes shelters for special populations like domestic violence and sexual assault services shelters. Northwest Youth Services has shelters for youth, shelters for families with children, which primarily happen through the provision of motel stays. And it also supports trained staff that work with those who are homeless to understand their needs and the types of interventions that can help them, as well as prevention services that we typically refer to as diversion, that are one-time services that keep people from losing their housing or having to experience homelessness. The transitional housing box, that teal box, includes longer-term housing solutions, often for special needs groups. The YWCA is an example of this, and things like the new Opportunity Council Recovery House on Girard Street is an example of this. The majority of the city funding goes into the brown box in the middle, the nonprofit and public housing, and this includes new housing developments by our nonprofit and public housing partners. For instance, the Sandwich Way redevelopment happening by the Housing Authority, Mercy Housing's new Barclay Family Project, and we'll show you a map of where a number of these are happening throughout the city toward the end of this presentation. I also want to note that we have a policy to integrate housing units specifically for households who are homeless on entry into most of these newly built developments, which frequently serve those with incomes ranging from under 30% of the area median income all the way up to 60%, which could be $4,000 a month for a family of 4, for example. The private rental category, that red box, is typically rental assistance that's paired with private market rental units through things like Opportunity Council's master leasing program or rapid rehousing programs. The city also offers incentives through things like our multifamily tax exemption program for new multifamily private market development in certain parts of town. And lastly, the homeownership box includes support for new homeownership development, like the project that's taking place with Colshan Community Land Trust and Habitat for Humanity out on Telegraph Road, as well as down payment assistance that's available through private lenders throughout the city for folks who are eligible first-time home buyers. And this category also includes the city's home rehab program, which hopefully you're familiar with. It offers very low interest and deferred loans that help elderly, disabled, or low-income existing homeowners address needed health and safety repairs, allowing them to remain in safe and stable housing and not be at risk of homelessness. Next slide, please. So the city and county partner with the Whatcom Homeless Service Center, which is an independent program of the Opportunity Council. And the Homeless Service Center maintains what's called a housing pool. And that pool is for those who are eligible to receive services, in need of services. And the Homeless Service Center links those households with agencies that have program openings that meet those needs. And so those agencies that participate in this system are shown around as spokes around the hub of the Homeless Service Center. It's not an exclusive list of every agency throughout the county that helps folks who are experiencing homelessness, but it does include most of them and all of them that participate in this referral system with the Homeless Service Center. And just a note that both the federal and state government, HUD, and the Department of Commerce are listed to the side, as they also provide significant funding for homeless services and housing and set a lot of the rules and standards that we need to abide by. Next slide, please. So we just talked about the housing pool, which assisted thousands of people in our community last year, and does so every year. And it's different from what you may have also heard of, the point in time count, which happens once a year, typically in January. And that gives us a snapshot. It's a homeless census of folks who are experiencing homelessness on that one day throughout the community. And so sometimes we share numbers about folks on the housing pool who have gone through some kind of an intake and done a more in-depth process to articulate their needs versus that point in time census. And in our community, the majority of folks who are homeless at a given time, based on that point in time count, are not sleeping unsheltered. They have shelter. So about 75% of them do, which is different from a lot of communities. And even when there is space available, it's important to note that some people prefer to sleep outdoors or not take advantage of shelter. And we hear reasons like social anxiety or fear of crowds, wanting more autonomy and privacy. It could be due to addiction issues or not wanting to follow the rules. But most folks do choose to take advantage of the shelter that's available. This slide just shows a snapshot of the composition of the folks who are seeking assistance. And you can see most people are single adults, as you might expect, but families with children do make up more than a quarter of the households in need. So this slide just really underscores that sometimes it is really more than a roof that's needed to address the needs of housing. We do think that housing is the primary solution to homelessness, but it's not the only thing that's needed. And most folks who are part of the housing pool do express that they have some barriers that need to be addressed in order for them to get stably housed. And many of them have more than a single barrier. And barriers can include things like prior convictions, owing rent from prior situations, getting a pay or vacate notice, or having other kinds of rental history issues, registered sex offenders, or folks who have had multiple misdemeanors within the last few years. So things like that need a lot of assistance often when households have these situations and are seeking housing but may not qualify or be able to go through the process of getting a successful application, especially when housing is in short supply like it is now. Next slide, please. And on the flip side, we have many, many needs and issues that really show us that households, again, need support beyond just that roof over their heads. You can see, nearly 90% of folks self-report that they have some needs that need to be addressed with services in addition to housing. And these needs, primarily mental health comes up, chronic health conditions, developmental disabilities, drug and alcohol issues, things like that. And you can see that about 60% of the homeless population have two or more, and this is pretty common to see these kind of co-occurring needs that require services. I'll turn it back to Tara now.
Thanks, Samia. One more point on this slide is it's important to note that those additional services that people need take resources as well. And so that's kind of the balancing act that we have, and we work a lot with the county, is to make sure while we're building housing and we're creating more shelter, that we have the resources to go into assisting people with the services that they need to. So we're going to keep going, but we're going to switch a little bit into more of the shelter strategy. So some of you may have heard about the Homeless Strategies Work Group. This was a work group formed by Whatcom County, and the city was a significant participant in that work group. It had a bunch of providers on it. And this last spring, that work group came forward with some goals and recommendations that were brought then to the Whatcom County Council and the Bellingham City Council. And I just wanted to start with some of the overarching goals here. And again, we're talking about not as much on the not as much on the housing side, but those the crisis side of homelessness is services and shelters. So some of the goals coming out of that is to make sure that we clarify the extent of what local governments can do to support this. I think you all know that we need the support the national and state level. This is a very, very big, I guess I'll put it in this way, burden for local government to handle on our own. This is a big, big challenge at a national level. And because of that, we don't have enough resources to do everything. And we know that this community would like to do everything. And so what we've decided to do is to prioritize our most vulnerable. I'll touch a little bit more on that. So, but We do have to prioritize. And then consider those actions that are and strategies that are appropriate for local government. So some people have said, hey, how about you do a no barrier, meaning no rules shelter? And that's probably not the right lane or appropriate type of activity for the government to get into. We want to build upon our own local resources and those that are available to us coming from the state and the federal government. And then this final one's important, that I would say probably one of the most important, is that we need to invest in those long-term permanent solutions over those temporary crisis solutions when we don't have adequate resources to do both. So an example would be, we could take that $15 million and shift that all into crisis. There would be no shortage of need there, all into crisis. And then we are not building those long-term solutions that Samia was referring to. With that said, we have invested significantly more in the last few years into shelters than we had in previous years. And that's because, as we all have seen over the last several years, the needs have been growing. So I just want to touch on new capacity. So the community has been very busy this past year. Last year was a rough year. We had built new capacity coming into last winter. But coming out of last winter and the needs identified with the Homeless Strategies work group, we just jumped into it and kept plugging away. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the new things that have been that have come online in the last 12 months. With support from the mayor and Whatcom County, we added 25 tiny homes that are operated by Homes Now at Jerry Field. We started about a year ago looking for another operator to help us support another tiny house village. And we issued an RFQ, and we selected the Low Income Housing Institute, or you might hear me refer to them as Lehigh, partnering up with a new nonprofit here locally called Road to Home. And this tiny house village just came online. We've been working on it most of this year, and I'll show you some photos of it as well in just a slide or two. And then some additional winter focused beds. So you all know we have base camp that was added just last summer, so the summer of 2020. It is a low barrier shelter that can serve up to 200 people. And this winter, I've called it a gift and several times, but we have Christ the King Church that has stepped up with the financial capacity and the volunteer capacity and the staffing capacity to operate an overflow shelter that is actually operating every night. It started in October, and it's going to continue for 5.5 months, so long as they have adequate resources. And we're talking about volunteer and staffing resources. And I'll take that moment to stress that these programs need qualified people to operate so that we can ensure the safety of the guests that choose to stay there, but also the volunteers that choose to serve there and the staff that chooses to work in these facilities. This is an overflow shelter that's operating in Old Town, but check-in remains at base camp. So Christ the King, one of the things that they were very clear about is the only way they would be willing to do this winter is if they had the support of the Lighthouse Mission Ministries. And that means the support of a very knowledgeable operator. And so base camp refers people to the Christ the King facility at 1013 Holly, and they will take a shuttle from base camp down into Old Town. And so base camp is looking for, their personnel are looking for people that they know get along well together and aren't really high needs folks, so that they're referring people on to a volunteer group, knowing that that volunteer group is going to have the capacity to serve those folks. Another shelter that the city is working with Northwest Youth Services on is a shelter for young adults. So this is that 18 to 24-year-old age group, an age group that the experts that work with this group feel like an alternative to a very large all ages shelter would be good for these young adults. And so this will be located at the city's civic field locker room. We used this a couple years ago for a women's shelter, and they'll be operating December through February. So these are kind of our new investments. And then new programs and projects that are also for our most vulnerable that we're working on. So these are things that we were able to launch this last year, the last slide, but there's some other projects that take more than a couple months or more than a few months to get off the ground. And one of those is we're looking at building a new facility for families with children. So we are currently, as a community, serving 70 families or so at a time in motels in Bellingham. These are families that are coming from all over Whatcom County. About 40% of our families that we're serving in motels in Bellingham are from outside of Bellingham. And so we know, and based on best practices, we also know that this is much better than staying in a car or living in a car or being doubled up in an unsafe situation. But we think that we can do better as a community to put these families into a situation that's healthier, a place where they have enough room, where they can get some normal routines down, including cooking healthy meals. And so this is a project that's currently being led by the city with support from Whatcom County, and our key kind of families with children partners are the Opportunity Council and Lydia Place. But our shelter program right now is motel stays. And we are fortunate that the federal government is funding this program at a pretty significant rate due to the pandemic. And this is why we're able to serve as many families as we are. So we're currently working on a feasibility analysis that will be complete this coming spring for that project. You may have heard about the Way Station. The Way Station is a project that's being led by Unity Care. And this is another one of our most vulnerable populations, are people that are coming out, typically out of a hospital situation or an outpatient situation, and that need a higher kind of standard of shelter. And of course, these are people that don't have homes. So this is our unhoused or population. And so Unity Care's partnered with Peace Health. They've kind of been leading this. We've been in the supporting role, and Whatcom County and is going to be the host agency. This will be a facility that will be located on State Street and part of the health department offices. And it'll be a respite shelter operated by the Opportunity Council. And they will also have care for like laundry facilities and food, or laundry and medical and showers facilities. And then finally, that third bullet down is the city's been working with Northwest Youth Services. I'm sure you've heard about this, to relocate the pad, which is a shelter located in downtown on State Street for youth. These are minors. These are 13 to 18-year-olds, I think up to 18-year-olds. And What that's going to allow us to do is serve that population in a more suitable part of our community for young, like children or youth, and then open up the State Street location for serving the 18 to 24-year-olds, which is currently a shelter that we don't have. I'll give you a couple, for those of you, I know most of you have not, unless you've been volunteering, probably haven't had the pleasure or benefit of seeing Garden View. This is our new tiny house village. This was taken maybe 2 weeks ago, and it's now open. And we are starting with 30 tiny homes this fall and winter. And we are permitted up to 36 tiny homes. 20 of those, the ones on the right that you see there, were purchased kind of with a slanted roof style. They were purchased by Whatcom County. And the ones to the left are being, the materials are being purchased by the city, but the houses are actually being manufactured and fabricated by volunteers. And that's been a big lift by Road to Home. This is a village that's being operated in partnership with the Low Income Housing Institute and Road to Home. So Lehigh, they are providing that 24/7. This is a 24/7 staffed facility, not run by volunteers. This is a fully staffed facility. And then Road to Home has hired a case manager, and that was really important to the city as we were looking for another operator, is to make sure that we get that 24/7 staffing, but also Samia talked a lot about the need for additional services to get people housed. This is an example of people sometimes need case managers or help to get them ready to be successful in housing again. And that was a high priority for us. We have 17 guests staying here and 15 of the units are occupied. We are prioritizing at this village seniors and medically fragile. On the bottom right there, you're seeing our ADA units. This is a sloped site, so we wanted to make sure we had some space where we could have those ADA units. I heard that the slope site came in handy over the last few days of having this storm. We had no water issues here. Other services, I don't think I have a picture of it, but other services that are on site are laundry facilities, a craft room, a computer room, showers, a kitchen, a shared kitchen area, common areas, and case management offices and staff offices on site. So wanted to share some photos, since this isn't a village that you can just pop into and roam around in. And then, of course, another strategy during the winter and year round is to continue to support those existing shelters. These are sometimes shelters that people forget about, but we have specialty shelters for domestic violence victims, for women, families and children, teens, adults, those with mental illness. Of course, base camp we've talked a lot about. And then base camp is, I think you know that base camp has about 2.5 years or so, almost 3 years left at its current location on Cornwall. And then it will be, the mission plans to build a new facility in Old Town, and base camp will relocate from Cornwall down to Old Town. And this is a big lift. This is over $20 million project for the community. So between base camp and the families with children and the waste station project, we're talking about a $40 million lift and new facilities, which is pretty amazing and phenomenal. And lastly, this one I forgot, second to lastly. This is a map that's showing where a lot of our projects that are in the pipeline, some are now underway, like Mercy Housing in Barkley, This is a housing development, about 80 units. And this particular development will set aside about 8 units for homeless on entry. So we're always looking, as we're building new affordable housing in our community, we're looking for our partner agencies to support those that are living unsheltered or in shelters, but unhoused in our community. The recovery house here in the Leonard Streets neighborhood, I believe that just opened, and that is for those that are recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. And there's just a whole host. The one that's not on here is the pad. It was an oversight on our side, so that's our fault. But the pad is located in Samish, but just showing that there's more than one neighborhood that we are leaning into to support these various solutions, these various pathways to get people into safe places in our community. And then finally, I talked about lots of different pathways. There is no one solution. Everybody is coming. Everybody has their own story, their own experiences, their own needs. And so we do need to create multiple different ways to help people become housed again and to be successful in housing. And what I think that is so amazing about this slide, and Sammy showed it too, but I wanted to end on it, is that we're pretty lucky to have the number, maybe lucky is the wrong word, maybe fortunate's the right word, to have this many partner agencies. I think you know that the city doesn't do direct service. We're not operating shelters, but look at all these partners that we have that are coming forward to help our community out.